everybody to today's episode of Index or Office Hours, number 47. Today is the 25th of January. You'll find today's agenda in the Stage chat channel in Discord. You're welcome to follow along. There are links to most of what we talk about in there. If anyone is new to Index or Office Hours, we love participation. You can do so by voice, by requesting to join the stage, or by text, by asking your questions in the Stage chat channel. As always, many exciting topics planned for today. So let's jump straight in. First off, we have Repo Watch, and I will hand over to Anna.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay, so let's see what we have on Repo Watch. So first, on major clients, we have 𝗂𝗲, and there haven't been any new releases since version 1.10.15. Then on Aragon, we have version 2020-0102, so a new version that contains a lot of fixes, and it also contains a change to penalize peers that send invalid RLP messages over a peer-to-peer. It also simplifies minor gas limit post EIP 1559. And it reverts a change that increased timeout for block body download from 30 seconds to 60 seconds. So like this contains a lot of changes. Open Ethereum, there haven't been any new releases since version 3.3.3. Then we have a streaming fast 𝗂𝗲. There is a new release, but it looks like just a new tag. I wasn't 100% sure on that, so if anyone from Streaming Fast can comment, that'd be great. If not, I'll just move on.
I don't know if we have Cohen with us today. I know he's pretty clued up on what's happening there. There have been some challenges with the just with the process of kind of incorporating upstream changes into the SF 𝗂𝗲 fork and publishing them. And I know the Streaming Fast team is doing some work on automating that so that we get flawless, releases and builds when upstream releases. So I think the multiple releases was just related to getting that right. But if anybody's running the Polygon Firehose, then definitely run the dm.2 tag.
It does look to me like it's improvements on the release process, to be honest. But I wasn't 100% sure. Okay, moving on. On GraphNode, we haven't had any new releases since 0.25.0, but we have had some changes in some of the PRs. So I'll start with PR 3084, which contains some groundwork for store operation pipelining, specifically writable store updates. So we talked about this last week. This PR has been merged. Then we have a new PR 3186 that adds change block to import type filter GraphQL entities. That is work in progress. So filtering GraphQL. We have 3184, which is filtering by child entity, work in progress. We have 3177, which allows you to perform database writes in parallel during indexing. It also gives you an environment variable for write queue, like a default write queue. This is work in progress. And then another noteworthy PR on GraphNode 3174. It affects chain, graph, and store components, and it adds code to properly resume from a subgraph block pointer if no firehose, cursor, is found. So that seems quite a big one, and it's also work in progress.
That's super cool to see. I'm really excited to see the store operation pipelining being merged in particular, and I guess the work on database write parallelization is built on top of that. That's great, and I hope to see the performance improvements that brings land in a release really soon. And I think also sorry, Anna.
No, I just said awesome.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, with PRs 3186 and 3184, we're seeing some of the work that the Guild core dev team is bringing to the table, and particularly child entity filtering is, I know, something that a lot of subgraph developers have requested. So it's fantastic to see that making it into the code base.
That's great. Okay. And the last repo for today, so indexer, service, and agent. There haven't been any new releases since 0.18.6. However, we have two noteworthy PRs. So 357, which fixes indexing status query used for health endpoints. And the only reason why this PR is in work in progress is because it's failing some CI checks for now, but it's very close for being merged. So there's that. And then the other PR noteworthy is 352, which speeds up the frequency of checking indexing rules and triggers reconcile deployments within 20 seconds of changing the rules. So what this means is that indexer will no longer need to restart the agent after setting the rules. And I think everyone will be pleased with this change. And this PR is still work in progress. And the rest of the stack, nothing noteworthy.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. Yeah, I think you're right. That last one is a big quality of life improvement. I know many indexers today, will change their allocation rules or whatever, and then immediately reach to restart indexer agent. And hopefully moving forward, we don't do that anymore. So yeah, guys, we'll just wait 20 seconds and your changes should be applied. Well, I guess once this is released. Thanks again, Anna.
Thank you.
Juan, over to you and Protocol Watch.
Yep. So Protocol Watch will have a few updates. Not like last week. Last week was super amazing. This week is super nice, but it's not as big as last week. So going forward, contracts, there has been a merge of the PR of the subgraph NFT transfer ownership. It's been merged to development branch, which that means that it's ready for deployment. There's also another small change that has been merged to the development branch, which is related to the deployment processes for the contracts, mostly to account for the new features added by that older PR. The network subgraphs, nothing new to update yet, but we will update next week. Forum governance, GDR7 was resolved as draw last week, but it was missing one dispute, which is now also resolved as draw. That was because the GDR7 included, I think, 2 or 3 disputes that all of them needed to be resolved at the same time. And then we have, this is linked to the contract update, but we have GIP 23 contracts have been deployed, which are the subgraph NFT transfer ownership contracts that have been merged to DEB. The update so that it's usable on the network is still on hold since it has to pass through a voting process, but the contracts themselves have been uploaded. Of course, they are paused, so they are not usable right now, but they are already live on the blockchain, basically. And then forum research, there's no new updates since the last Indexer office hours.
Awesome. Thanks, Juan. Before we move on to the next session, does anyone want to relate experiences, good or bad, about any repo watch updates or client updates or graph node updates that they've done? Or does anyone want to chat about anything we covered up to this point? Okay. So, next up, we are going to just briefly cover 3 issues as part of a new segment, which is currently called Ongoing Points of Interest. Super catchy, I'm sure you would agree. The intention with this segment is really just to, as an indexing community, you know, there are certain things that we talk about and come across from session to session that we don't necessarily resolve in that session. And these are things that bear follow-up discussion. And so the point of this segment is really to keep track of the things that we want to keep on everybody's radar and give an update on them as we progress through IOH week to week. The other thing to say is, given that we all know about this segment, if you feel like an issue that we discuss or have not discussed should be on this list, please shout. You can do that either by voice or by dropping a note in the stage chat. But hopefully this is a good segment for us moving forward. Today, there are 3 items on the list. The first is the ongoing issue of some subgraph failures not being correctly marked as deterministic. And so there is issue number 3059, which is linked in the agenda on the graph node repo, which is tracking examples of this. I added one a couple of days ago. But this is just another kind of call for action. If you're an indexer and you are seeing subgraph failures, and those failures are, you know, by looking at the error, you can see they're deterministic, but GraphNode is not marking them as deterministic, please add your examples to this issue. This really helps us, you know, capture the types of errors that we should consider deterministic over time. And the upside for all of us as indexers is that no more manual closure for allocation. So yeah, please do add your issues to that. Does anyone have any examples or thoughts about that one? Okay. The next one is an issue that I've put on this list. So I've had trouble compiling or building indexer agent or generally most components in the indexer stack on my Mac M1. I've tried quite a lot of things to get that working. I know Hope had a similar issue and possibly fixed it. I've linked issue number 29 on the Agora repository, which might be related to this. And I see there was an update to Agora just 4 days ago, which I've not tried, so that might be resolved. Is anyone else experiencing this issue on M1? Hope, can you confirm that you got it working? Okay. The next one on the list is the much desired and fabled manual allocation workflow in Indexer Agent. So we've spoken in IOH before, and many have shared their thoughts in Discord over the months that the kind of indexing rule paradigm for selecting and assigning kind of stake value to subgraphs is a little bit indirect, and often we kind of just want to get directly at the allocation problem and say, hey, I want to allocate here, or close this allocation, or change this allocation to this amount. And the manual allocation workflow should bring all of those capabilities to Indexer Agent. So I'm briefly going to ask Ford to share some words on the status of that work and when we might see this landing in Indexer Agent.
Hey, yeah, so I'm excited about this feature. I've been thinking for a while now. And I'm currently working on integrating the resolvers into the indexer management server. So with this work, I'm adding GraphQL resolvers to the indexer management server and then adding indexer CLI commands. So not only will you be able to use the indexer CLI to, for instance, close an allocation with indexer allocation close command, but with this PR, we'll also be able to add on additional tools or write your own scripts that will interface with the GraphQL server. So you can simply send GraphQL mutations to adjust your allocations. This is going to be important for enabling more advanced, allocation optimization tools or machine learning tools to have a better management of your business strategy as an indexer. So maybe this would be a good time to answer any questions about that. Cool. Yeah. So if there's no questions, I'll just give an update. I'm hoping to have the initial pass of this done this week, write some tests, and then do some integration testing, and have hopefully something for you guys next week.
Awesome. Thanks, Ford. I guess a question from me. This kind of iteration that you're working on at the moment, will that support kind of like in queuing actions and executing them as a kind of batch, whether or not that's actually batched as a transaction? But is this idea of queuing supported yet?
No, I have actually started into that a little bit as well, but I'm going to be finishing that work up after I do the manual allocation. So this manual allocation management will simply update the indexer CLI API. So you can update your allocations. You can do allocation close, allocation create, allocation reallocate. And then after that, I'm going to be finishing up what I'm calling the actions queue work, which will allow you to define different management strategies. So you can have, for instance, an oversight strategy where the agent will never take action on its own, and it'll simply add all its desired actions to an actions queue. And then you as an indexer can go in and confirm or cancel any of those actions. So just to restate that, that'll be coming in a subsequent PR later. So hopefully in 2 to 3 weeks.
Cool. Thanks for clarifying. Yeah, I know, even the simple manual allocation workflow will unlock a few issues that folks have experienced. One that comes to the top of mind is, the close and allocate issue after an undelegation and not enough stake being available to execute that transaction. There are a few bit of, kind of sticky edges like that, and I think even a simple manual workflow will give indexers, tools to get out of those situations. The other thing I'm really excited for when the actions queue does ship is it unlocks a lot of gas efficiency opportunities. And for the folks that have been asking about the status of open many and close many, the allocation management functions on the contracts, those would pair really well with the action queue Ford is talking about.
Is there any way we can read more about this? Sorry, let me go first. I just want to learn more about this. Where should I, read more about this, and where can I play around with it on the testnet or?
I'll definitely let you guys know when it's ready to be tested on testnet. I do have a PRD type document that I've written up, and yeah, I could see that'd be useful for you guys to see. Right now, I just have that in my Notion. I'll think about a way to share that with you, maybe a public Notion page or just pasting it on the forum so you can see what my thoughts are around the plan for those two features.
It will be cool. Yeah, thank you for it.
I just have one quick question. And a few examples as well, sorry.
with the parallel allocations recently being deprecated, what should the workflow look like with the new release when, let's say, we want to up the stake on an allocation? And then would that also be in a parallel where we have to close twice, or we can just close once since it's allocated to the same subgraph?
So parallel allocations were originally implemented in order to allow for scaling, and that was something specific to the payment network at that time. Those no longer provide a benefit for scaling your query services, so it's not recommended that you use parallel allocations anymore. It's going to be more gas efficient to do a close and allocate in one transaction. So if you update your indexing rule to change the allocated stake for that deployment, when the agent reallocates, it'll reallocate with that new amount. You could also, of course, use a manual transaction to close and allocate, which, as Chris mentioned, is going to be facilitated and a lot easier once I add that to the indexer CLI with the work I'm currently doing. Does that make sense and help?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Ford.
Any other questions for Ford? Cool. Thanks, Ford.
Sure. Yeah, and as always, feel free to ask any questions on Discord, and I'll help out when I can.
You are a meme for a reason, sir. Thank you. Okay, next up we have topics in focus. And today we have a fairly meaty topic for conversation. It is a problem that affects many of the consumers of the graph, and of course, you know, as indexers, we really sit at the back of the stack, and we don't always feel some of the problems that users are facing. And by users, I mean both the developers that build their applications and leverage subgraphs, and build the user interfaces that consume that data, and of course, end users who use those interfaces and, you know, really their experience, that end user experience, is directly impacted by the quality of service that we as indexers provide, and you know, the network provides as a whole. And we have observed a kind of challenge in the network recently, and that challenge is the network as it stands does not have any inbuilt incentive mechanism. That means that as the amount of signal on a subgraph deployment increases, that more indexers will step up and index that subgraph. So one way to think about this is the subgraph indexer diversity. You know, how many indexers are actually sitting behind that network gateway endpoint. And so because that mechanism doesn't exist, what we tend to see today in the protocol is if some new subgraph, some hot new subgraph deployment comes out, and, you know, a large amount of signal is put up against that deployment, what you typically see is, you know, indexers swooping in and making as large an allocation as they can to saturate the rewards that are available by that new subgraph deployment. And indeed, you know, rationally speaking, it makes sense to size that allocation as large as possible, so long as the realized yield on that allocation is slightly above the average yield of existing allocations for that indexer. I hope everybody's following this. It is dense, and it took me a while to get my head around it. Now, the reason this is a problem is because we have important subgraph partners, right? Important development partners and customers who have provisioned their subgraphs on the decentralized network and maybe one or two indexes have swooped in and allocated, that has brought the reward level down and means that no other indexers are really incentivized to index that subgraph. And then subsequently, either those indexers face technical issues and are unable to serve queries, or they unallocate, right, which means the gateways stop sending them traffic, and another indexer then, might be able to allocate and, recognize the kind of economic incentive to step in and allocate to that subgraph, but they probably need to wait the time it takes to index it fully before being able to serve traffic for the subgraph. And so I'm sure you can all see how this is a problem. We have subgraphs with large amounts of capital being signaled against them that don't have a kind of guarantee of service reliability. And what we want to see is the more signal on a subgraph, the more indexers are there, and by virtue of redundancy and decentralization, the more likelihood that a high quality of service will be maintained on that subgraph. So I'm going to stop there. Go ahead, Paul.
So I was just going to add, I've been kind of looking on the Reddit on some sort of graph threads, and I think there's a general sentiment that there's some value, like you're adding, Chris, for reliability and continuity of serving a subgraph. And it seems like for especially a small indexer, if I'm thinking about being in my shoes, starting and you don't have a lot of stake, making an agreement with an application team or development team who's putting a subgraph out there, and you're saying, hey, if we write up this external contract, I will, even if my rewards go down to 8%, I'll continue to index you because we have this external agreement. And not commenting on whether that is in the correct ethos or not of the graph, but just, the pure fact that this type of conversation can be initiated, I think kind of speaks to the natural need for that sort of mechanic, some sort of longevity, or I'm thinking about it as an employee, you have shares vest over a cliff or something. So I just wanted to add that I think things are kind of stirring in the natural conversational space as they have entered our potential plans of how to stay stable.
Thanks for sharing, Paul. Yeah, it's definitely a concern, and at least to respond to that, personally, I think that as a network, we need to be, first of all, we need to recognize that doing anything in a decentralized way is a lot more difficult than doing it in a centralized way. And so, the idea that a centralized alternative is equivalent is a false equivalence, so there's that to say. But recognizing that it's really important that we are able to capture the value generated by the graph's technology, right? The real world value flows inside the GRT economy, inside the network that we collectively operate. So I certainly see this as a serious issue and would not want to see private agreements being struck as a solution to this problem.
Yeah, I think that I agree. It definitely steps outside the ethos of a contains decentralized system to provide the service that we all seek.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, Constantine.
Yeah. So yeah, it's problem from different point of views actually, and I believe that we already have someone who already served this kind of subgraphs, like a private subgraphs with maybe not GRT payments and so on, because it's quite obvious way for guarantee that your subgraphs will be indexed. But other way, we have another problem here, like huge subgraphs, huge teams with quite popular decentralized applications. They wanted to understand final price per month for serving queries, and right now this problem doesn't solve anyhow, and that's why part of these companies can also make some agreements with different indexers for serving their queries per month basis. And I think only one thing that we can make here is implement some kind of maybe predefined packages to subgraphs with like applications from indexer side who can serve all queries and the agreement side inside of the GRT economics, and it will be pretty native way.
So if you had one indexer only allocated to that subgraph, that model, I guess, could work. But once you have more than two, then the indexer selection algorithm kicks in, which looks at more factors than just price, though, right?
Yeah, it could be just, like several indexers who will apply to index this, like guaranteed index this subgraph and guaranteed serve all queries from this subgraph. And it will be some kind of, I don't know, like agreement from their side per this subgraph developer that they will serve all queries per 1 month. And it will be at least 4, for example, per each of them. It just solves a couple of problems the same way. That's why it could work.
Thanks for sharing. Go ahead, Oliver, please.
Yeah, so as you set up the original problem statement, it's really about the service levels, right? The coverage, so to say. And it reminds me on an idea that I think 𝗨𝘀𝗀𝗃 and yourself have floated in the past, just sort of the idea of a max allocation cap per indexer per subgraph.
Yeah, I still think it's really cool. Sorry.
Yeah. And that to me always comes back, as something that kind of makes sense. Maybe even, a little bit more sophisticated when it gets to the algorithm. I don't know if you were able to calculate at the time of allocation the expected rewards, and you could say no indexer can, allocate more than say 30% of what the rewards of the subgraph would generate, or something to that extent. The more I think about it, that resonates with me.
Yeah. So having laid out the problem statement, I think it's worth. Actually, first I just want to recognize Konstantin's point, which was that part of this problem is also about the nascent state of the fee market. And given that we're still in this kind of bootstrapping phase, it's quite hard to surface a price in the market with reliability, and I do think that is an issue, but I would say that it's a separate issue to the discussion we're having today.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And then to follow up from the problem statement, I think so. I kind of see a few problems. I think the big problem, as I touched on right at the beginning, is that the protocol itself has no mechanism that ensures or incentivizes that there is this scaling of subgraph indexer diversity as the amount of signal increases. And it turns out that's a really hard problem. And at least in some of the discussions that I've had, many of the solutions that look simple and viable on the surface tend to open up Sybil incentives. And we really don't want to create Sybil incentives because we don't want, indexers pouring resources into splitting their indexer up into many pieces and just otherwise working on things that are about extracting more value from the network rather than kind of, focusing on their operation and creating real value. Now that said, this is not an untractable problem, and there is a major area of research going on right now about a mechanism that could be introduced into the protocol that would achieve this effect of as signal scales, there is some increase in the number of indexers actually serving that subgraph. But protocol upgrades take time. They take research, they take simulation, and it's a slow process, as it should be. So I think there's that. There are short-term solutions as well. I think one of the okay, so you've obviously got the problem that the protocol doesn't do anything to prevent these very large allocations that saturate the rewards. But the other thing is that the economic equation that exists for indexers today, doesn't line up with the outcome that we're trying to create here. And it's the same economic equation we've spoken about being problematic in relation to stake decentralization. And that is that generally speaking, the marginal cost of allocating more widely or allocating the same amount of capital to more subgraphs, the marginal cost of that increase is not worth the increased revenues of allocating more widely. So the economically rational thing to do as an indexer, even if we forget about the problem that indexers can make very large allocations and crowd out other indexers, even if that problem didn't exist, the economic equation today means that indexers are incentivized to go with a smaller number of allocations and just allocate large amounts of capital. So that's another side of the problem that I think is playing into the dynamics we observe as well. Just to throw out a solution, it's certainly not something we would ever want to be long term. But if, for example, the foundation, under a kind of strict set of compliance terms, kind of was thought about subsidizing the gas costs of allocating widely. Obviously not infinitely widely, like there would need to be kind of reasonable terms attached to that, but maybe that could change the short-term cost equation for indexers and allow them to spread capital more and also have that be an economically rational thing to do. Thoughts?
Yeah, I have additional idea here, as a possible way of doing this. Maybe we, as a huge indexers, maybe Protofire or Framework or maybe Figment, someone else, everyone who recognized as a big indexers here can just allocate one token per each subgraph and just don't close it without any problems. And I believe that nobody will join to us just for closing allocation for one token, and it will solve all of this problem. No?
That's an interesting idea. So if I may just kind of play it through, the idea is that larger indexers open a 1 GRT allocation. The risk there is obviously if those are left running for a long period of time, a delegator could come in and pay the gas to nuke the rewards, but it's a 1 GRT allocation, so no one's going to do that.
Yeah.
And the upside is if you're talking about a subgraph that has maybe 3 heavily allocated indexers and all of them fail, the gateway would then fall back to routing queries to the 1 GRT allocation. Am I understanding that right, Konstantin?
Yeah, basically we just allocate one token and we participate in indexing, syncing subgraphs as all other indexers, small indexers and so on. And in this case, all of us will serve queries. And even if someone from small indexers or with one quite big mid-size indexer will go out from this subgraph, big indexers will be still there and will serve queries without any problems.
Yeah, but it would be kind of like a fallback because it.
Yeah.
I think the indexer selection algorithm won't really select you with a 1 GRT allocation based on your total stake in most of the cases, right? So only as a fallback.
Yeah, but it will be a good enough solution because we spoke about a case when somebody can serve queries who already allocated enough tokens. So in this case, gateway will redirect queries to small allocations. No?
Yeah, you will have a fallback, so it's better than nothing. Of course, that's a major improvement, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really creative idea, Konstantin. Definitely something that is worth following up with. I'm going to add it to our new list of points of interest.
One question I have is like, is there a way to do it without doing the on-chain part? Like, we use the off-chain subgraphs feature a lot, and if there were subgraphs, in some sort of curated list to say, hey, just like, index these off-chain. It's just a way to make sure that users don't run out completely of indexers. Like, that would just be a little easier. Overall, just making that work, just to say, hey, like, update your environment variable versus, make some on-chain transactions and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I personally, I think we should stay away from off-chain schemes, but for precisely the reasons I said earlier about really taking the role of capturing this value flow inside our economy is really important. So anything off-chain, feels a bit wrong in that respect. The other points there are, the one kind of problem that the chain solves that would need to be solved some other way is the problem of discovery, right? Like, just updating a bunch of environment variables, sure, will mean you index locally, but nobody else knows that. And then the final thing we're saying is, and I touched on this earlier, that like a decentralized offering is not the same as a centralized offering, and specifically with respect to the graph, we have indexers post like on-chain proofs of indexing, and we establish this economic consensus to provide data integrity guarantees for the results that we serve. And anything that we do off-chain comes with none of those data integrity guarantees or economic security.
Yeah, that's a very good point. One thing I was wondering is, like, does the indexer, not the indexer, does the gateway, it's able to see off-chain subgraphs, right? Like, I see it show, like, when I add an off-chain subgraph, like, I still see it show up in my indexer status output.
Your indexer status output is actually querying indexer agent. Like, if you're talking about the indexer CLI status, so that's not querying the gateway.
No, I'm thinking about like that GraphQL endpoint. It like, yeah, it is on the indexer agent, or maybe it's on the indexer service. I need to actually look at the URL. It's like ends in /status.
Yeah, I think that's the indexer agent API. So either way, that status is being reported by your indexer and not the gateway. That said, though, theoretically speaking, there's no reason why the gateway couldn't, pull indexers and detect if they're, because I think even if you're off-chain syncing a subgraph, you will serve the indexing statuses API for it. So in theory, the gateway could figure that out.
Yeah, maybe that's the one I'm thinking of. And like, one final question about this idea is like, I don't know exactly how undelegation works. Like, if we had one of these 1GRT allocations, like, would delegators still be able to undelegate, or would they have to nuke that allocation?
They would still be able to.
Okay.
Yeah, but good thought for sure. But yeah, I think it's a pretty novel idea, actually, because as much as they could nuke the allocations, it just would make no economic sense to do so.
Well, there's risks, to be honest. Doesn't it defeat the incentive model entirely? We have to rely on, good guys.
Absolutely. I just heard myself say absolutely. I think you're completely right. And relying on goodwill is never a good strategy in systems like these. The ultimate solution here is in protocol. And as I said, like, there is a very active research effort on that, and it's looking like, a challenging problem, but certainly a tractable problem that we will solve. So we are talking about a stopgap here.
But it kind of ties back to the allocation cost, right? If we could just, solve that thing by layer 2, it would be so easy to just reallocate on the fly using automated tools as well.
I don't think that solves the problem. Reducing costs, allocation costs, either through layer 2 or through subsidies or through whatever, it fixes the economic equation, or in other words, it makes it economically rational to allocate capital widely, but it doesn't prevent large indexers who have an excess of capital to allocate from allocating aggressively and saturating the rewards for a subgraph.
Sure, but that's two different issues, eh? Right. One is not having an indexer on some specific subgraphs. I think that would be probably one, and that could be easily solved by having a very cheap cost of allocations. We would definitely allocate a lot more than we do now if it was almost free. And we would then, try to gather more queries across the entire network instead of just focusing on a couple of subgraphs as we do now.
So actually, I had a question with regard to gas costs, and also, who are we talking about when we're talking about the larger indexers? But with regard to the gas costs, if we were to spread out a large number of allocations across all these smaller subgraphs, one GRT, who would we expect to pay for all those gas costs? I would imagine it would build up pretty quick, no?
Okay. Wait, what was the first question?
So who are we asking to pay the gas to make these small allocations?
So if we were to follow this strategy, that has literally been ideated in this session, so it definitely needs thought. But in theory, the value of the allocation is so low that it could be okay for, and it's also worth saying this is a completely altruistic action. So if we're talking about, say, P2P or Figment, both are very large indexers, both seem to be long-term aligned with the success of the network. So spending $100 on gas fees once, is not a big deal. These allocations could be very low in value, right, like 1 GRT, and they also needn't be closed, right? They could run over the 28-day expiry. And I don't know, it's worth confirming that the indexer selection algorithm wouldn't, require the allocations to have not been expired. But if that's the case, then those allocations can just sit open. There are no gas costs for maintaining them. And as Konstantin explained, it would just mean that if all of the other, allocators that have allocated substantial amounts fail for some reason, the ISA would route as a fallback the traffic to these larger indexers, who would be doing so, who would be opening those allocations altruistic. Did that answer the question, Kai?
Yeah, it did. Thanks, Chris.
Sure. I mean, hey, Predator.
Yes. I don't speak in English, but I understand you. I understand only, really.
Okay.
I convinced the GRT is the future. The GRT is the best token. This is good idea. Juan, tú hablas español, por si acaso.
Predators, I love the enthusiasm. If you want to ask any questions, if you could do that in the stage chat, I would really appreciate that. I only say that because we try to speak English in the voice chat just to move along quickly.
Okay.
But thanks for joining us and thanks for your enthusiasm. Kai, you asked what are large indexers in this context. I think the definition is essentially an indexer. It really depends on the subgraph in question and the amount of signal on the subgraph. But in these discussions, a large indexer is one that has enough stake to be able to, in a single allocation, allocate enough capital on that subgraph to essentially saturate the rewards rate and kind of bring it down to network equilibrium. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Cool. We have 8 minutes. It's open session here. Anyone may fire away.
So I don't know if anyone's recently tried to build Aragon and just blindly installed Golang, but the Fedora package does not work as a compiler for building Aragon. It had, because apparently we use some assembly somewhere in there that it doesn't like. So yeah, just a gotcha, something to keep an eye out for.
Thanks for that report, Kai. So I guess coming back to the topic in focus then, to recap, we recognize this problem in the network. Long term, long term sounds longer than it is. Medium term, this is a tractable problem, and the protocol will include a mechanism to ensure that a high quality of service is present for subgraphs, particularly those with lots of stake. But we do have, the shorter term period. And, I think maybe one piece of the puzzle here is the social layer. I think anything that we can do to work with larger allocators of capital in particular to distribute that capital more widely with a view to, achieve a better quality of service for those subgraphs is worthwhile doing. And it goes without saying that this kind of relies on goodwill from these participants, but economically speaking as well, though, I think many of them are aligned with the success of the network as a whole. So it does line up in that sense. Yeah. Thoughts?
Yeah, actually, I have. Sorry for that, but I have additional question about. I already asked about it in the forum. Is like initiative where we start calculating any rewards and like allow to open allocations only for those indexers who already synced to the chain head or like subgraphs. Why it's important? Because it's also will work for this goal. Like not like any random indexer can just like jump in, jump out without thinking of chain this subgraph first. Maybe it will also help.
That's definitely, if I understood correctly, that's definitely something I'd like to see, Konstantin. You're talking about requiring a valid POI to open an allocation, right?
Yeah. Sorry for my English. I'm trying to improve it, but still.
Yeah, I'm. This is definitely a proposal that I'm in favor of. There has been some active discussion on this on the forum. I'll drop a link to that in the stage chat.
Yeah, unfortunately, not so active, and that's why I asked about it again. Maybe someone else, maybe Ford or Oliver, know about it something, because Brandon like spoke about it a little bit, and it seems like everybody forget about it after that.
Yeah, I also wanted to say, I think we're still at the scale where there's not a huge number of subgraphs that kind of fit this criteria. Like I think pull together governance was one. There's one like inverse subgraph that I think maybe having discussions about this or coming up with ways for people who want to use our service to kind of get in touch with us and coordinate with us, just person to person in the forum might be able to. Or in the Discord, I meant.
Yeah, certainly in the interim. Obviously, like we want to kind of replace the need for coordination with incentives and mechanics. But I fully agree that we can maybe come at it at more of just an interpersonal and coordination level in the shorter term. I do worry though, because as much as it's pull together governance or art blocks here or inverse there, these are the seminal builders of our space. We're so early, and the opinions that people build of the network and their experiences in interacting with it stick. And even if we're not talking about many instances, it's enough to give me concern. I want people to be delighted when they use the network. I'm sure all of you feel the same way. Okay, well, thank you so much to all of you who've joined, and especially to those who've contributed. Discussions like these are always the best. I hope you have a fantastic Tuesday, and we'll see you next week for Indexer Office Hours number 48. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Amazing.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Bye.